Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. So, as we get more former and current Browns to chime in on the Myles Garrett situation, we're getting more insight on what could have possibly motivated the situation. And one of the things that people usually do when something like this pops up, if they look for recent reasons for this to change, right? It has to be something that happened this year that makes Myles want to jump ship after the team went 11-5 in 2023. Something that happened in 2024 has to be the reason why he is requesting a trade. But it is possible that the seed for wanting out of Cleveland has been planted far before even Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry took the jobs that they currently have right now. The seeds might have been planted when Myles Garrett was a rookie and the Cleveland Browns went winless. One of the things that I know has been out there for a while is the sentiment from people close to Myles that he has no desire to be Joe Thomas. And what they mean by that is they don't want Myles Garrett to have his whole career played in one team and not win anything, right? Like that was, I remember hearing that from people close to Myles Garrett back in 2022, right? Like before any of the trade rumors came out, right? Before anything went bad with Deshaun Watson. That was out there. That was a thing that people knew about Myles's camp and Myles's people. That was a desire for Myles's career. Part of the reason that fear became something that they thought about was the first season Myles Garrett played for the Cleveland Browns. The Browns went 0-16. Now, you might think that I'm grasping at straws here, but Jameis Winston talked to the media, and I thought the quote was interesting. So on this recent episode of Off the Edge with Cam Jordan, Jameis Winston shared his perspective of the internal dynamic of the Cleveland Browns in 2024. Jameis said, and I quote, "From what I saw, the Browns didn't seem like an organization that was deteriorating. The sentiment was conveyed during a off-camera conversation with Myles Garrett, who seemingly had been contemplating a trade request throughout the season. Jameis stated that Garrett's response to the observation was simple. Jameis, you've never been 0-16 before." A lot of people are quick to blame Myles's trade request, and reasonably so, on circumstantial things. Deshaun Watson trade didn't work out. The Browns don't currently have a quarterback. I wonder how true those things actually are the reason for Myles wanting out. I think a good chunk of why Myles wants out is simply because he wants out. I don't think this is something where Myles was really trying to hang on and stay in Cleveland, and the Browns forced his hand and made him want to go. I mean, this is a guy who was in favor of trading for Deshaun Watson for all of the reasons that the Browns traded for him, right? They thought it was an upgrade at quarterback. They thought it would put him in a win-now window. They thought it would put him in a championship window. This is a guy who wants to win a Super Bowl. The Browns made the move for Deshaun Watson to try to get a Super Bowl because they felt like Baker Mayfield was not going to get him there. And up to this point of his career, while Baker has played good football, he has not proven himself yet to be a Super Bowl caliber quarterback in a conference that right now does not have a ton of quarterbacks. So the math was probably right on that, on the Baker Mayfield side of it. The math was wrong on the assumption that Deshaun Watson would be good enough to provide that for you for the Cleveland Browns. But this is a trade Myles Garrett wanted them to make. This is a trade that Myles Garrett was more than okay with them making. So that trade being the sole reason why Myles Garrett would want out, I don't know. That doesn't feel like it hits correctly to me. Like there's something off about that. Because again, he is fully aware that he wanted Deshaun Watson here and that he fully believed that Deshaun Watson would be a Super Bowl champion with the Cleveland Browns, and that would be something that was integral to keeping him here in Cleveland, and why he structured his contract the way that he structured it. Like, he was all in on the Deshaun Watson thing. I find it impossible that he now all of a sudden like blames the Browns for trading for Deshaun Watson and wants to punish the Browns for trading for Deshaun Watson when he wanted to trade for Deshaun Watson. I think a lot of this has to do with the scars and the doubts and the seeds that were planted in his first year as a Cleveland Brown when they went 0-16. Because the Browns were actually tanking that year. See, let's talk about the term tanking real quick before we really get into the long-term damage of why tanking is just not a great strategy in sports, or at least the strategy that people make it out to be. But let's actually define tanking, right? Because some people say that whenever you have a losing season, like the Browns won 3 games this year, people are going to act like they were tanking. No, the Browns weren't tanking. They just sucked. Like, the Browns invested everything they could into trying to be good this year. The quarterback sucked. That had a debilitating effect on the rest of the team. The offensive line wasn't much better. The run game wasn't there. And the Browns won 3 games. They tried like hell. They won 3 games. So what the Browns did for most of 2024 was not tanking. Now, when they decided to pull Jameis and play DTR and Bailey Zapp, for reasons that had less to do about winning, it wasn't tanking, but it was very reminiscent of tanking. And I wonder if that had a negative effect on Myles, reminded him of the overt tanking that the Cleveland Browns did in 2017, which Andrew Berry was a part of the front office that did that. He wasn't in charge at the time, but he was a part of the Sachi Brown front office that tanked in 2017, and like outwardly tanked in 2017. Like, the Browns, before that season started, had shipped off their starting quarterback, had shipped off their starting cornerback, had shipped off like 2 of their, like, the Browns did a wholesale trades before the season even started, because they were having no intention on winning games in 2017, because they thought that they could get the number 1 pick in 2018 to pair with getting Myles Garrett. Ironically enough, that effort to try to pair Myles Garrett with the quarterback has, in a really long, unwindy road, backfired on the Cleveland Browns, because I think that seed that was planted in 2017 is the exact reason why Myles Garrett is uncomfortable tying his future with the Cleveland Browns organization, given what he has dealt with early in his career. And this is why I think tanking is a bad strategy. It is one thing for something to go wrong and you have a bunch of injuries and you lose a bunch of games. And then while you're in the midst of losing a bunch of games, you put a quarterback in who you're trying to see what's up with, and you lose more games, right? That's not tanking. It feels like tanking, but it's just what you do when you're out the playoffs, right? Every team does it when they are out the playoffs. If they have a quarterback on the bench that they have not seen much out of, this is what they do. It's not tanking, but it does feel like tanking if you've been through tanking. Again, tanking is when you just like go into the season and decide you ain't even trying to win, right? You're just trying to get that number 1 overall pick, and you overtly try to put your team in a position where the roster cannot compete. But when you have players on the roster who have been through tanking, they're going to see that, and they're going to get a little shaken by it, right? They're going to get a little bit of memory. They're going to get a little bit of memory about what happened when they first got here, and that's going to be a problem for the Cleveland Browns. Tanking is a short-sighted strategy that only makes sense if you have absolutely no commitments to the people on the roster while you are tanking, because tanking creates scars for the players. These players train their whole life to get to the NFL, to be as good as they can possibly be at their craft, to win as many games possible. And then from an organizational standpoint, you throw down a mandate and you say, we ain't even trying to win. That creates damage. That creates scars. Scars that don't go away so easily just because you have a couple of winning seasons. That plants seeds in players that they might want to get up out of there. It's a bad strategy, because even if you do draft great players, while you're tanking like the Cleveland Browns did, there's no guarantee that what you put them through early in their career is going to make them want to stay with you later in their career, which, again, the Browns are currently living through with the prize of all their tanking, Myles Garrett. There are like 3 scenarios where tanking actually makes sense. It is if you got a quarterback prospect in the draft so good. Like, we're talking about Andrew Luck as a prospect. We're talking about John Elway as a prospect. We're talking about Peyton Manning as a prospect. Like, a prospect that is so good, so undoubtedly the number 1 overall pick, and so sure of a bet to be a good quarterback in the NFL. The question is, will they be a Pro Bowler? Will they be an All-Pro guy? Or will they be a Hall of Fame guy? Like, that is the level of prospect that it has to be, and it has to be at the quarterback position in order for tanking to make sense, because that kind of guy can give you stability and make it so that you win so many games that the scars that you had from earlier from tanking from those players, it does not really exist. But unless that is the goal, unless that is the prize for your tank, you're gonna have situations like this pop up. I say this all the time. No sports franchise in football has ever built a dynasty by tanking. The Eagles did not tank to get where they are. The Kansas City Chiefs did not tank to get where they are. Eagles have won that Super Bowl in 2017 and switched over to Nick Sirianni after a disappointing season for Doug Peterson. The Eagles have only had 1 losing season since they won that Super Bowl in 2017, leading up to this Super Bowl that they just won. They did not tank. And even that losing season was, a 4-win season where they fired the coach? Clearly not tanking. Like, tanking has never brought anybody a championship in football and has never brought anybody sustained success, because the damage that you do to the culture when you are tanking is significant. We can't continue to ignore that, right? Whenever I hear people say the Browns should just tank and try to get this guy, or they should just suck it up and try to get the number 1 overall pick so they can get their quarterback. Again, if it's John Elway level prospect, right? Cool, go do whatever you got to do to get that dude. I understand. But if it's just like Shedeur Sanders or, some other prospect that's not really that caliber, like, then you are risking a lot when you tank. We got to stop selling tanking as this consequence. We got to stop selling tanking as this consequence-free, risk-free strategy that people sell it as. Like, it's only logical to maximize your losing, because that shit creates scars that players don't forget. They remember it when it's time to request a trade or make a decision on if they want to request a trade. They remember it when their contract's up and they got to make a decision whether they want to stay here long term or not. It's not really a coincidence that every single first round pick of the 3 that you had in 2017 has either requested a trade or has been traded from the Cleveland Browns, right? Jabril Peppers traded for Odell Beckham. David Njoku has requested a trade, but then the Browns were able to talk him out of it. And then Myles Garrett is currently requesting a trade. This shit does damage to you. Going 0-16 does tremendous damage that time does not heal. Time grows that damage. Time blossoms that damage over. And it's easy for people to forget because year to year, it doesn't feel like that's still there. But anybody surprised by the fact that 0-16 still haunts Myles Garrett to the point to where it's a factor, an obvious factor in why he wants out. I'm not saying that the Browns are about to lose Myles Garrett and have to trade Myles Garrett because they went 0-16 in 2017. I'm saying it's part of a larger brew of why Myles wants out, and it's part of why he is so steadfast in wanting out. You hear him say that to Jameis Winston, right? In response to Jameis being like, hey, it doesn't look like it's that bad right now. And David Njoku said the same thing. Denzel Ward has said the same thing. And I can only think, hey, man, if we never put this guy through 0-16 his rookie year, maybe we would have more benefit of the doubt with him to where he wouldn't request a trade at the first sign of trouble. But since you did put him through 0-16, 8 years later, that's something that comes back to bite you in the ass because now he doesn't want to give you the benefit of the doubt of being able to fix some things when they're broken because he saw when it was broken last time, he went 0-16. A lot of people want to paint this on one specific person, whether it be Andrew Berry, whether it be Jimmy Haslam, Deshaun Watson. But the truth is that the reason Myles Garrett wants out of Cleveland, it's bigger than just one decision being made or one move not working out or one person being in charge. If it were that simple, I'm sure it would be able to be worked out. It's bigger than Andrew Berry. It's bigger than Kevin Stefanski. It's even bigger than Jimmy Haslam. Maybe if you don't go 0-16, maybe if you put an effort to win Myles' rookie year, that seed never gets planted in his head that this is an organization that's not trying to win because he would have never witnessed it, right? Maybe if this team were a little bit more aggressive a little bit earlier, maybe if this team wasn't trying to sell off all their good players, the culture wouldn't be where people are always consistently afraid that the Browns are going to try to tear it down, trade everybody, and go through another swath of losing seasons just to build up assets. You did horrific reputational damage to the Cleveland Browns when you tanked that you're still trying to recover from. On top of the Deshaun Watson trade not working out. But I'll be honest, the damage that you've done with the Deshaun Watson trade, that is much easier to clean up than the long-term damage that you did to this team when you overtly tanked for like 3 years. And we did all that tanking, right? Because it was supposed to bring us all these assets, and we can't blame the current regime on this, right? Andrew Berry was not the GM when they decided to make these decisions. Kevin Stefanski was not the coach when they decided to do it. We could blame ownership for going along with it, but when they decided to go tanking, they did this because they wanted to get all these assets. And right now, Nick Chubb is a free agent, so maybe they keep him. Denzel Ward wants to stay as long as you can keep Myles, but Myles wants out. If you lose Myles, you're going to lose David Njoku. You're going to probably lose Denzel Ward. So what was all that tanking for? Right? Because the tanking is the reason that he might want out, or at least part of the reason that he might want out. You see how tanking is a self-defeating prophecy? It's not this great strategy. It's not this default that you should go to, because when you tank, you affect the lives of the players on that roster. And those players have scars from when you made them tank. And those players remember those scars. And some of those players, it's never gonna matter that they got these scars from tanking, right? Because they're not going to be part of your long-term plan. But some of these players are a part of your long-term plan, right? Like if you start tanking right now, Mike Hall's a part of your long-term plan. That's going to have an effect on him. Grant Delpit, JOK, right? All guys young enough to be a part of your long-term plan. Going to have an effect on them. Maybe this doesn't pop up immediately, but it will pop up eventually. If you give them any kind of worry that it might go back to the old days, that fear is going to be prevalent in their mind, and they're not going to want to go back. I think the introduction of a more scientific approach to football has been good. I think there's been a lot brought to the game that has improved it by a more scientific approach. You know, things that we deem analytics, right? That get called the boogeyman, and people call it Moneyball and kind of get mad. A lot of those things have been good. The Philadelphia Eagles have been doing Moneyball more than anybody else in the NFL. They just won a Super Bowl, right? This is not about the entire concept of analytics being bad. I think that is a bad way to go about it, right? But tanking is one of those ideas that were brought into prominence by people who also champion analytics. And while there's a lot good about what analytics has brought to the table in the improvement of the game in all sports, really, in a more scientific approach to football or sports has been helpful, there's a downside to it, which is sometimes you can get so wrapped up in the scientific approach that you forget that you're in a business of people. And tanking is the most callous, least considerate strategy that's been thought up by these people. And this is a strategy I think everybody should abandon. It's not been successful. It has not created champions consistently. Tanking has been popular for like the last 15 years. We've not seen one dynasty in sports pop up because of tanking. It is time that we abandon tanking as a logical strategy. What it is a callous strategy that ignores the fact that sports are played by people, and ultimately you have to be good in your relationships with people in order to win and keep these players long term, and tanking is something that makes that hard to do. Tanking is part of the reason, if not a large part of the reason, why it is that Myles Garrett wants out and is not willing to give Cleveland any benefit of the doubt in fixing this situation that they're currently in. It's why he doesn't entrust his career to the Cleveland Browns, because the Cleveland Browns are an organization, even though it was different people in charge, that tanked overtly and went 0-16. You know, the reward of tanking is that you get Myles Garrett. Well, the downside to tanking is that you make it harder for you to retain Myles Garrett. You tell me if that's not a zero-sum game. Y'all let me know. I think tanking's bad. We should abandon it. Not all analytics, but tanking specifically, yeah, let that one go. You cannot expose players that you want to keep long-term to these kind of things, because eventually it'll come back to bite you in the ass. So if you've ever needed a reason to understand why tanking is a bad strategy, right? And when people argue about tanking over the season, like the people who want to tank can sometimes be obnoxious about this, because they'll make it seem like you're stupid for not wanting to lose games outright. And at the time, it makes sense for people to feel that way, right? Because like, oh, one loss here determines whether you're the 5th or the 7th seed, right? But if you stack up enough losses and you're not trying to win, you build more problems that draft picks can't solve. That's my whole thing. That's what I wanted to talk about. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.